There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that will lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of the comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. So if you're like many people that I speak with, keeping your mind calm is a daily challenge. And it seems it's gotten worse in the last couple of years, not better. That notion of how do you stop all of those ruminating thoughts so that you can focus, so that you're solving problems more efficiently, so that you have a greater sense of satisfaction, so that you have a better state of well-being in general. And some of that really is about being in a state of flow. Now, no doubt you've heard that expression flow before. I'm not talking about financial flows. I'm talking about mental state of flow. So what is it? What are the ingredients for achieving it? How do you create more of it? And how does it actually help us improve both our productivity and our mental health? That's what we're going to talk about today. My guest is Dr. Julia F. Christensen. She's a Danish neuroscientist and a former dancer, currently working as a senior scientist at the Max Planck Institute for Empirical Aesthetics in Germany. She studied psychology, human evolution, and neuroscience in France, Spain, and the UK. And then in her postdoctoral work, she was looking in interdisciplinary international research labs at University College City of London and Warburg Institute and a bunch of other places. And she's now a postdoctoral Newton International Fellowship by the British Academy. She has a brand new book that I think is a fabulous read called The Pathway to Flow. So Julia, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. That was a very, very kind introduction to my trajectory that brought me here. Thank you so much. I'm actually at the Max Planck Institute for Empirical Aesthetics now as a senior researcher. So I work on the brain and the arts and the flow state and creativity and very relevant stuff.
I really did enjoy the book for anybody who's interested in this, and for anybody who's interested in a reasonable layperson's tour through what do we currently know about how the brain works. I think it was fabulous. I just think you do a great job. And I say all of that background because it is important to know that you have done quite a bit of work in the field of neuroscience. But fascinatingly, you're combining that with arts. I know you were a dancer. Okay, is there a bigger connection between arts and neuroscience for you personally?
For me, there is a very big connection because it connects two elements of our well-being very much, which is our body and our brain. We sometimes think of the brain of this organ that sort of mysteriously hovers in between our ears. And we don't think as much about it as we should as connected with the rest of the body. Because from our brain, by a long ganglia through the spinal cords, there are connections that flow out into our body, into organs, into muscles, and information flows from the brain, telling our body what to do, but also importantly, what we enact with our body, the movements that we do, the actions that we choose to perform, they also funnel information back into the brain. And by so doing, and by choosing the right movements with our body, the actions with our body, we can actually have a say in what activity is going on in our brain. Not completely, but we can have some say. And that is so important for our mental well-being, for our physical health, and also for things like productivity that are so important in the business world.
It's interesting. So I'll just pause on that one because it's an important concept, and it's heart and soul through your book too. This notion that what I do with my body affects how I think and feel. All right. Now, we don't usually think about it that way. You usually think about the reverse direction. But if anybody has ever danced to music you love, just for fun, not professionally, but just for fun, the mood lifting impact it has. But the whole point is it's not just that one thing. It happens in many ways and we don't even know it.
That's very true. The interesting thing about creative behaviors in general, and maybe dance and music making and singing in particular, they rely on so many neurocognitive systems in our brain. So we're kind of giving our brain a boost in many directions when we choose to enact these activities regularly.
Yeah, that's interesting. I, for a host of complicated reasons, was giving a talk recently around what can you do to get yourself into a more innovative state. And one of the tidbits that I discovered in the background work that I was prepping for this crazy thing that I'm doing, at any rate, was that Einstein believed that music and the arts were the source of creativity. So apparently he carried his violin with him always on his bicycle. So he was ready to pick out and play music at any given different time. So I think if there's ever a reason to believe that music at least inspired one person we think of as particularly genius, there you go.
Oh, exactly.
So let's talk about this thing called flow, okay? And I always like to ask why, of all the things you could study about the brain and the body and the synchrony, what got you interested in flow?
Well, I lost it. That was what got me interested in it.
Okay.
So I was a professional dancer, and flow was part of my life for as long as I can remember. And probably most people know the flow state from when they were children, when hours and time and space just disappeared around us and we just emerged afterwards feeling so good. And I had had that and cultivated that as a habit in my professional life as a dancer. But then I had an accident. I couldn't continue that career, and I moved into academia. I became interested in the brain because I wanted to know what's going on in there when we can't stop thinking, for example. And the path that brought me there, I realized that there was something I wasn't having anymore, which was this flow state that put me on the quest to find it again. And that's what I also narrate in the book, the path that led me back to flow and the neuroscience that helps us to find it again.
That's right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. All right, so explain to me, I'm going to come to a story you open with first, but can you give me a little better description of flow? I mean, there's been a lot of writing about it lately, but you have, I think, 8 principles that explain the concept.
Yes, so flow was first coined as a term by the Hungarian researcher Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, who spent decades of his scientific career researching this very special state, talking to artists, creative people, scientists, to understand what it is to be in flow. And he came up with these 8 principles that describe perfectly what it feels like to be in flow. So people might have heard of the skills challenge point that for you to be in flow, your skills and the activity that you're doing should be in perfect harmony. And then you sort of just hover there and feel this blissful feeling. You should also be doing what you're doing for intrinsic rewards, have a clear purpose, and you have this zipping by or slowing down of time and space being something else. And then this fusion of action and thought, you become the movement. You stop thinking about what you're doing and you express. So when you read those 8 principles by Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, you really just want the state even more. The issue is that it's sort of used to happen to us more like a coincidence, something that happens by chance. And what I advocate is that we can take much more ownership over that process and evoke flow almost on cue if we create a habit. And what neuroscience is really showing in the past years is that creativity and flow, that's not something you have or don't have. It is something that is a habit. And a habit can be learned. Our brain has neuroplasticity, and it learns by what we do with our physical body. So I'm getting back to the physical body. We have it in our hand, literally, how we activate our brain. And our brain gets good at what we use it for. So what do you use yours for?
Okay. Lots of things. So, yeah, right. Coaching, analyzing problems, speaking, all those sorts of things,
A lot of things at the same time. And
Yes.
that creates a very restless mind because we're using it for many things at the same time. And for being productive and happy, we ideally want a stream of coherent thought. But if we keep letting it go in different directions, we're not creating this coherent flow. And so it's really about the right neural connections and creating those with the actions that we do, like Einstein playing himself into a bubble with his flow tool, which was his violin. This helped him go focus back. And that's the other part, that there are 7 ingredients to the flow state that we can navigate towards in our daily lives, in our creative activity, maybe something that we have outside of our work, and that can really bring us back to ourselves and that mental focus that we all crave. And this might seem like a sort of a strange pastime to sort of chase flow, but you will have so many benefits of it if you create a flow habit. Longitudinal research shows that if you are people who are in the flow state regularly, they seem to have a better physical and mental health. And it even might make us better people to be around because we're just more balanced.
All right. So now you're telling me all the things that go on in my head simultaneously in the work that I do is not only making it hard for me to sleep. I already know that when I can tell when I've not had time to wind down, but it's also making me not so much fun to be around. So my friends will say, thank you very much.
I find you lovely. I find you lovely. I can see none of all that. So.
All right. No, I'm joking aside, there is some truth to that. But at any rate, this notion of the mental focus, kind of being so in one with the work that you're doing, knowing that you're bringing your skills, that it's motivating, that it's got a sense of purpose behind it, and that sense of, I lose track of time. And I understand that feeling. That does indeed happen on occasion with me. And it's that the idea that we can put ourselves in that mental state more often, that there are habits that we can develop that allow us to be in that mental state. And being in that mental state is where we're going to have, I suspect, our creative ideas, our most rewarding work, our sense of less stress and relaxation, even if it is about work, and so on, and more productivity. So, all right, so you said there are 7 things that can create this flow state. So give me the 7 ingredients, please.
Exactly. I'd love to give them. So I think of them as 7 ingredients, like for your life, that you can run after a little bit, but it's not a dogma. It's very important that we don't take this as a dogma. So a very important ingredient to flow is the routine. Have a routine in your life with your flow tool that you choose. We might want to talk about who chooses what and so on, but the important thing is to have a routine. Einstein took his violin, he had it with him, he would play when he needed it. That's a routine. Routines, repetitive movements are washing machines for minds. Our brain hates unpredictability. It gets edgy if we can't predict what is going to happen next. It makes an unrestful mind. So routines with our art, with our creative activity, brings us back to this security. Our brain can predict again. Our senses know what they are feeling, seeing. The second that we can spin together with the routine is that we do need to practice skill and technique. All artists, all creative people, they did not wake up one morning and suddenly have the brilliant idea. What is never told in these myths of geniuses is that they spent ages just, going through the moves of their art. A belly dancer does the bar every morning. A musician plays their scales. They play themselves into this cocoon where only the movement exists and fusion of action and awareness happens. Singers, actors, everyone has the tools of their trade as a technique practice, as a routine. So we've got routine and technique practice. And we, very importantly, for a still mind, need a social community. The third component is the social community that we create by having a creative practice. Every art world, as I call them, because they are little worlds that we are to discover, they will lead us into a group of people who are more like us than maybe others in personality-wise, interests, and so on. Why is that important? Literally, physically, our brain needs to feel the touch of other people, needs the sight of smiles and happy eyes, because this information, again, is funneled from senses, little receptors in our skin, little receptors in our eyes, and feedback loops from our facial muscles that mirror that we are smiling together now. They transmit information to parts of the social brain around the limbic system that regulate our immune system, our hormonal system, and therefore signal to our brain, all is good. And it's not that easy to find social connection. If you find your art, you will find your people. So that's the third ingredient. We do want to find the fourth one as well. So that's connectedness and aesthetic emotions. Have you heard of the feeling awe? Seek awe, but how? Well, natural spaces, museums. There are many ways how the arts and creative behaviors, maybe in the cinema, you can suddenly feel those feelings that are special, goosebumps, and feeling this elated sensation of being, transformed after walking out of a good movie or something. These feelings are good for us because they focus us back on one sole train of thought, and with that, activate coherent activation patterns in brain and body. Restoration processes kick in, and afterwards we just feel better. So that's a very important ingredient too. Seek aesthetic emotions. If you can't create them yourself by the movements you do, well, watch those of others. So we can do that brilliantly. The fifth is that we want to use our imagination. For example, to learn our skill, many sports people and dancers use the mental training. Sit up straight makes a very onergogamic kind of movement. If I say, now imagine I pull you up by your hair, you will have a very ergonomic way of moving, and it will be much more healthy for your body. And that is because in our brain, in the memory systems, all the movements, every experience of our life in this world are coded. And by going into these memories, evoking them as imagery, we connect our brain and our systems and then produce more efficient outputs. So fantasy is not a sort of idle pastime. It is something that can help us optimize, and it is connecting our neural systems. So good reasons for doing that. The sixth ingredient for a happy mind and a flowy mind is to make sure to have movement in your life. I know everybody's talking about this, but why is it so important to have these 150 to 180 minutes per week aerobic sport in your life that the WHO is recommending? Well, it so happens that if we don't, we have a very much higher probability to suffer from heart disease, diabetes, dementia, and so on. And why is that? Well, when you speak to physiologists, neurophysiologists who work on the brain, single cell recordings, what they tell you is that, right, our brain has many different systems, but there's one system in particular, one that stretches like a Alice band over your head, which is your movement systems. They're important for making our face move, our body move. And interestingly, those are all interacted with the different systems we have in our brain, with our language systems, with our sensory systems, with our memory systems, with things we thought that's not movement. It is all movement. It's all linked. That means that our brain is a movement junkie. It needs movement. And we adults in the Western world, we sit up to 9 to 10 hours, and that is so unhealthy for our brain and our body. When we sit, we bend the hip unnaturally forward. We suppress the solar plexus, which is a nerve bundle just under our breastbone, which can make us feel literally inhibited because we've just been compressing it. We need to stretch our arms up overhead. When do we do that? We never do it, maybe in dancing or when we're doing some other creative activity. It comes with the activity that we do, but maybe we have a sedentary kind of creative activity. Well, make sure you collect that little nugget of ingredient for your flow as well. You need 150 to 180 minutes per week aerobic exercise, dancing, walking, whatever it is, but you will not have a healthy mind if you do not have that. It's a non-negotiable. And linked to that one is actually expression. What is expression? Expression is this ephemeral thing that happens when I talk to you with my words, maybe, but it is actually movement of my body. So when I gesture, I'm doing this a bit more now. In fact, in my brain, there is a pathway that controls both my vocal apparatus and my upper limbs, my gestures. So the same part that makes me able to speak is going to make me able to gesture. And when I dance, I also gesture. When I play an instrument, it is a gesture. When I sing, that's an expression with my vocal apparatus again. But what about writing or drawing? It is expression. And interestingly, dance research shows that dance movement therapy, one of the treatment ingredients, those that lead to the best outcomes to help against symptoms of depression and anxiety, for example, is the expressive component when we dance it out. And research about expressive writing has shown that possibly doing expressive writing maybe 2 or 3 times per week, 20 minutes, just for ourselves, downloading onto the page what it is that we feel and then throw it away. But this act of downloading it to the page seems in some cases to be linked to improvements in immune markers, better wound healing, and less doctor's visits. So while it's still first evidence, I think we should give it the benefit of the doubt and go back to the journaling we did as adolescents and just get it out of the system, because it seems to have some very good health benefits for both body and mind. And then the 7th ingredient, which is that we should be cultivating purpose and intention in our life. And that's obviously this huge debate. How do I create meaning in my life? Well, starting really small by having a creative practice, because not everyone is lucky and feels that their work is actually giving them meaning in their life. That is a really tall bar, but we can take agency. We can create meaning with what we do as a hobby, as a creative practice. And there it is very important to remember that striving, being competitive, taking risks and chasing after the perfect something is something that is really important in the business world, is really important to make us, successful in our business life. But for flow, we should maybe try to dial back a little bit on these 3 behaviors that I call the mind hooks that we want to navigate a little bit around, because they root us firmly in the present. Competitiveness, risk seeking, and pleasure, like empty pleasure seeking, they are related to some very strong stress responses in the body. It's not a bad thing. It prepares us for action. It makes us good in what we're doing. But when they're in our body for too long, they teach us an unrestful mind. So because it's dopamine fueled, it's something that makes our brain learn. Jump that way, seek a new adventure, seek a new thing you can buy or gain or something. And this striving is great for some success in work, but not good for finding flow, not healthy in the long run if we're looking for flow. So that's my navigation aid. That's why it's the pathway.
There's a lot to digest in there. There's this notion that flow is a quieter mind where I'm in synchrony with what I'm doing and I lose a sense of time and I'm completely immersed in it. And if you've ever been in that state of flow, it's incredible how much time just sort of passes by without awareness. And it feels good. It doesn't feel like work if you happen to be in a flow state. All right. I love the idea that it's a habit. So that means I can create more of it. And then I love your 7 things. So let me see if I've got all 7 of them here. One is to have something that's a routine so that your brain has predictability. Whatever routine that is, the brain calms down in effect with a routine. So like a routine for starting your morning, or a routine for starting work, or a routine for leaving work and coming home. Any of those help. And then there's this notion of having some skill and technique and practice. There's a notion of finding a social community that I connect with. There's so much other research, not from neuroscience and flow, but from stress management, from the happiness literature that says that this community thing is really important. And interestingly, it's like feeling I'm with people that they're like me. I have a meaningful place. And there's all that human interaction, the smiles, the eyes. I love your explanations about what that does to the brain. All right. There's the sense of awe, having emotions that inspire awe. And I know for me, that comes from nature, but it also comes from movies. If I'm watching and I didn't realize this is why for a weekend for me, a really truly guilty and restful practice is a Netflix binge on a Netflix series I find enjoyable, transformative, good relationships. I mean, all the things that I value. Okay. And then you talked about imagination and you talked about the need for movement, which is why I think so many people find flow from running, because that's some of the same thing. And it's also a routine and it's a practice. And then there's the movement, the gestures and the movements and the writing and the drawing. And then the last one is some sense of purpose or intention in any aspect of life, whether that's work, it's my creative hobby, or even it's just what I do in my local community. I think any of those give you a sense of connecting to something that's more than just this task striving right in front of me. I do a decent job on that one?
You did a great job. I have never heard them so well summarized. I should learn from you.
You did a great job presenting them, so it's pretty easy to get there. Okay, so I think you did a good job of explaining each one. I'm not sure there's one that I want to dig into in particular. But I want to go to something is there something you want to add?
Well, I was wondering if it might be interesting just to think for a moment about this statement that I made, that we shouldn't be chasing only after empty pleasures, right? So that might sound a bit like, oh, so are you preaching we shouldn't have fun in life? And by all means, we should. And the interesting part here to mention is actually that by engaging in flow activities that really give us flow, we connect those low-level reward circuitries with broader meaning-making circuitries. So it means we will have pleasure in what we're doing. It's not that we are refraining from pleasure to have a meaningful life like the eudaimonists in ancient Greece,
right.
you know. It's more about imagining that they're both systems in our brain that are like the hedonists, that after pleasure all means, and then the eudaimonists who seek meaning in life. But let's connect the streets between those two camps in old Athens and have both. And that's what it seems that is being happening when we are in flow. And it's actually also linked to a different type of neurotransmitter activity. That's very early research, but we know that this instruction, be in the moment, is really hard. But when we are actually hovering there in that blissful state of satisfaction, we are experiencing something that is more linked to endogenous opioids and endocannabinoids, so body-owned drugs that are out and about and that give us this placid feeling of just being, as opposed to a dopamine fueled activity that makes us strive and that has, you have this anxiousness of getting there. You are not hovering in the now. You are more of like, okay, it's exciting and I'm going there. That's a different kind of brain soup than being in the moment. And so cultivating this state of being, obviously we have to create the moment in a way that we like it. So that's why I'm saying on our pathway to flow, we want to make sure to create cues in our surroundings, in our office maybe, that will be reminding our brain of flow. So when we direct our attention to them, we can use it to go into that state. For that, it needs always to be present when we're in flow, of course. Example, my dance shoes, I always had them with me while I was at UCL, getting out at night into the cold rain. I needed some motivation and I would just look at the shoes and they would be linked to that feeling of flowing into the night in dance. And the same could be a drawing utensils box or a knitting utensils under the table. Just look at it and then you sort of suddenly focus back, you remember back to that feeling. People might know it from listening to songs from the past. That's a very strong cue that will take you somewhere, or scents and tastes that have a very strong marker. But use this, reverse engineer this feeling of focusing back on something good inside your flow activity by strategically placing those cues around you. Because for a habit, it has three parts. It's got the cue, then the movement we do, and the reward. It's always this little spinning. And so if we make sure to have these cues that set up the right moves, then we're already one step further to create this flow habit with our flow tool. So having those little cues, I call them pathway prompts, and I always have one actually red fingernail. It's private what it means, but it's a flow prompt. So pathway prompt, so people can be ingenious in having something on themselves, in their pockets, in their bags, a little altar in their space, which is linked to all these little cues that are part of the flow tool that they have chosen for themselves. And then it will catapult you reliably into flow, like Einstein with his violin, when he felt it against his skin, when he started to feel the vibrations, the fingers holding the bow. It is all part of those cues that are funneled from our body, from the texture, from our senses, like the tactile sense, smell, vision, all these senses that funnel information that are cues to our brain, and that then set up movements that are conducive to flow.
Interesting. So this explains to me why for some people, the right piece of artwork in their office gives them, we would say, a sense of calmness, they might say, a sense of satisfaction. But what that is a cue, a prompt for flow. Or I think about a particular time when I was writing a particularly difficult series of articles, and I always started my writing session with the same music.
Brilliant. Exactly that.
It's because it was like that became the cue for, okay, now I'm focusing and now I'm getting into this
Great.
one.
Yeah.
And other people have other other people have other objects around them. It's like I found these. I didn't even know that this is what it was doing, but I can now see intentionally using them. And that's the whole point of your book, is that these are the intentional tactics that will create more states of flow and, more importantly, help to quiet the mind. So the ruminations, the craziness, the spinning around in circles stuff can take less real estate space and I have a chance of being more focused on the work that I really want to get done. Okay. Let's talk. You have some wonderful tactics in addition in the book, but before I go there, I want to go back to something that you started the book with, which I really enjoy. And it's the pink elephant example. And you kind of flow that all the way through the book. Explain to me tell me the story about the pink elephant and why this is important, especially for flow.
Yeah. So it refers to rumination. That's the clinical definition of what I'm talking about. And I call these thoughts that loop around in everybody's mind pink elephants, inspired by Dumbo, who unfortunately also had a little, weakness. Like I had a weakness when I was out of the dance world. I couldn't really walk. I wasn't really feeling well. And I had these thoughts on repeat. And I watched Dumbo, and who also had a weakness and who spun his weakness into a strength, because he has these big ears, and suddenly he becomes the elephant that can fly. So it's a story of spin your weakness into a strength. And we all have weaknesses, be it trauma, be it physical problems like I had. I couldn't walk properly. Everyone has their trauma, their thing to carry, and it will evoke looping thoughts. It's very, very few people who don't know about rumination. And rumination is repetitive thought patterns about something in the past, and we cannot at will stop them. There's a lot of good information about, people well-meaning advice, just think of something else. Just empty your mind. Okay, good luck. It won't work, because in the moment that you tell your brain to forget something, you are activating the semantic networks of what you're supposed to be forgetting. So it's going to go into a loop of reminding itself of the same. So actually, the only chance that you have to take back agency of what is going on in your mind is by taking it into your hands, literally. So by enacting behaviors with your body that will activate your brain in a different way. Because the more you have these thoughts that spin on repeat about the stupid neighbor and the other boss, or the unfairness of life, about these things in the past that we have no way of changing anymore, the more activation is in the memory systems, the more likewise thoughts will be activated, of the same valence, of the same arousal state will be co-activated, and it won't help. So the only chance is to enact behaviors through the body so that this information can flow from the body into the brain and change those activation patterns. And the best is to have these pathway prompts that can help us, but enacting behaviors with the body is the way forward. And I discovered that precisely when I was not feeling very well, when I had lost flow, when I was sitting too much, exposing my brain to the toxins of sitting too much, and suffering from ruminative thoughts about the past. And the way I got out was by chance. I started drawing. I took a pen and I started drawing. And I first started copying very simple. That's also my mantra. Start simple. Don't get ahead of yourself. Start simple. I copied dancers. I drew the movements that I could not do anymore with my body. And it happened just one evening, and it took 6 hours. I was in complete flow for 6 hours. And that was the first time after years of losing it, I got the flow state back, and I had no ruminative thought anymore. And I now knew, okay, this is what I need again in my life. And I now need to reverse engineer it. And that sent me on the quest.
On the quest. I should just say, for the record, you were a professional dancer. You had an accident that ended up with a spinal injury, if I remember the story correctly, and that there was some question of whether you would ever walk again, let alone any number of, certainly not dance again. So that's a pretty traumatic event to deal with. And I can imagine, like, you're back to studying and you're missing that sense of flow in the thing that you had, and then the ruminations that come with it and everything that goes along. So there's much more to say about that story, I know, but I just want to point that out because it's a big deal there. Really, really big deal.
I think about that just briefly, everyone has something that has not been perfect in their life. And the question is not how bad that is that has happened to you, but that you understand that you can take agency back over your life by choosing something as simple as doing creative activities daily. It will give you agency back. You won't understand it without having done it, because the neural connections need to be made. So if you take that path and just give it a try, you will experience feelings that you don't know yet. And so just go that path.
Right. It's interesting you say creative. And by creative, we could do drawing, we could do doodling, we could do music, we could make music, we could, any instrument, anywhere, we could dance, we could just move in any physical way, knitting, any of the crafts, any of those. And you don't have to be good at it. You just need to systematically do it.
Yes, it's not important what you draw. It's important that you draw, so that the neural connection will be made in your brain. And I actually call this the Phoenix circle. Start, get ready to start from scraps again, like start copying very simple. And then you go to, expanding a bit and expressing yourself and go back to copying again. Don't worry. It's fine.
Reminds me, what was this 10 years ago that everybody was carrying around these coloring pencils and these things, elaborate drawings that you could just color in, adult coloring books, they were called at the time. Those also can be part of it. So anything that you want to do, but the notion of creativity. What I find fascinating about this whole discussion is because we tend to think that our mind is in control of everything. So I control my thoughts is the mantra we have. And what you're saying is, by trying to control the thoughts, all I'm doing is reinforcing the strength of associations. And I'm making those memories pop up more. And the neuroscience, I also know, will support that one. So the question is to do something that doesn't incur those thoughts. And this is where the creativity activity, or the physical activity, puts your body into doing something different, which will change your thinking. Did I get that reasonably right?
Yeah, that was a brilliant summary, because the creative activities are activities that we can do without incurring in the 3 mind hooks that are dopamine fueled, like the competitiveness, the risk seeking, and the pleasure seekerness, those will keep the activation, the arousal levels high, and keep activating memories and thoughts that spin around. So because it is possible to practice the creative activities without this, they are particularly valuable as flow tools. I'm not saying everybody has to do them, but I'm just saying they are particularly valuable because you can practice them without these considerations of status and getting stuff and beauty and that. You can do ugly art and it can be extremely good for you. Maybe you are feeling rubbish and you need to express something very ugly on paper, and it can be very cathartic. So it's not for going on any walls in any museums in that moment. Leave that for another time. But for getting well, for finding flow, for making a flow tool for yourself, don't worry so much about the outcome. Be in the process.
Well, I can imagine some people that I know who will remain nameless will turn any activity into a competitive activity. So we're going to have now my art drawing for our flow state, but let's see who generates the best picture is what I can imagine. So we're not trying to do that. We're trying to do this just for the creative expression that comes with it. And a reminder, journaling, just writing, but with a physical pen and paper, because it's the gestures in your body, the movement in your body of the physical writing that's going to make the difference, not the typing. All right. Okay, I find this fascinating. I just want to highlight this for a moment, that there are 3 behaviors, 3 practices, 3 routines, if you will, that we use the word mind hook, but I'm going to use it in a different way. We get hooked on. Okay, and they create more ruminating thoughts, not decrease the ruminating thoughts. Because what they do is drive the mind to want more, and that doesn't get us where we want to go. So the 3 mind hooks are risk-seeking, we might say thrill-seeking, taking wild chances. That comes in many different forms, right? Skiing comes to mind as one of those. I happen to love to ski, but there's a ski and there's a ski. Any competitive activity. So that doesn't mean I go to sports for fun on the weekend as part of my community, but I turn it into a competition, an intense competition. And pleasure seeking, as in let me buy another and another and another and another. Those kind of things that become a little bit addictive,
Exactly,
we might say.
So go on these low levels.
Yeah, those will diminish the flow. So what we want to do is not turn our flow activities into risk-seeking, competitive, or pleasure-seeking. We're just doing the activity for the practice.
Yeah, I love that. That's for being in the moment with it. And the concept of that actually comes from clinical psychology, where the therapists speak about the risks of disclosure. So where it's very important who you disclose your vulnerable self to, because when you express, you might express things that are very personal. And if you post that on Instagram, let's say, or you post that or tell someone, or you dance publicly, you will receive an evaluation. That can be a glance, that can be a like or not a like, and that is stress for the body. It is something that will induce stress response that tells from the body into the brain something's wrong, makes you edgy. So this is not conducive to flow. I should say, of course, again, as we were saying before, these 3 behaviors are incredibly important in other aspects of our life. And we would probably not be here if our ancestors hadn't incurred in competitiveness, risk-seeking, and pleasure junkiness, because we simply wouldn't have gone around the next corner. We've just sat down contentively and not done anything else. But our ancestors sought out more, tried to conquer, and they made things beautiful until they worked, until they were perfect. Well, that's progress. That's innovation. That's what we need also to progress as a species. And thankfully, we are still here because we have those systems in our brain too, help us survive. It's just that our ancestors also incurred in dancing, music making, doodling. The first abstract painting in a cave was found, I think it's 70,000 years old. Our ancestors took a great deal of care to make body ornament, to decorate things, to make the cave walls pretty. So there is something there in our mind, in our brain, that drives us to dance, to sing, to make music. They are incredibly energy consuming activities. Why should these behaviors have survived evolution? It was so hard to get food in for us in these prehistoric times. Why should we spend it on dancing and music making and doodling things instead of having more food somewhere, So something happens when we go into these trance-like states that are extremely conducive to health and probably a good life.
That's great. All right. So you've inspired me, Julia, with the 7 creative things that I know I can now put more back into my life to create more moments of flow. You've inspired me to get out my art supplies over there, my watercolor supplies in particular, and kind of come back to that one, and to go back to some form of music making as well, because as I'm inspired, the creative process is a way of quieting the mind, turning us more inwardly to that flow state, and then to be more intentional about having flow triggers in our work life that will help us get back into that natural state of flow. I love it. The book for everybody is called The Pathway to Flow. Highly recommend it. Great read. Lots of tips about neuroscience scattered throughout, as well as deeper explanations for what these 7 principles are about, and a bunch of ways in which you use them to make a difference in your daily life. Julia, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Really appreciate it. And may the flow be with you.
I love that. That's fabulous. That should be my sign off from now on. May the flow be with you. I love it. All right. Join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone.
Thank you for joining us today. Tune in for another edition next week with Dr. Wanda Wallace on the Voice America Business Channel. Reach outside your comfort zone this week.